By 2050, there will be 10 billion people on Earth. In 1987, there were 5 billion.
Tear down this wall.
That's right, the world population has nearly doubled since the first Predator movie came out. And more people means more food. Now, feeding 10 billion people, that's not just a challenge, it's something we've never done before. We're talking about a planet-sized buffet that needs constant refilling, where innovation and ideas must outpace our appetites, or we literally risk biting off more than we can chew.
What was wasted last year would have fed our armed forces. That's like throwing victory into the garbage can.
But we're the human race. We invented the wheel, we harnessed the power of fire, we turned corn from this flimsy thing into this gigantic yellow monster. We even grew potatoes in space. So although feeding all these people is going to be a challenge, if we learn more about the world of food, we can all make the choices we need to make sure this huge round buffet table never runs empty. This is Real Ag.
Production of Real Ag is made possible in part by an underwriting grant from
Kansas Farmers Union, working to protect and enhance the economic interests and quality of life for family farmers, ranchers, and our rural communities. Learn more about our mission of education, cooperation, and legislative advocacy at kansasfarmersunion.org. So, you may have noticed that we use a lot of old video pieces in this show. Either things that the government made, or hidden gems from the public domain. They can range from genuinely useful, like this piece.
Yes, the best crops come from our soft, rich topsoil.
To completely strange and unusual, like this one here.
You've started a club.
But funnily enough, there aren't really any old films strictly about potatoes. You'd think the world's most versatile vegetable would have a starring role somewhere, but the closest we've got is this silent USDA film from the 1920s about sweet potato seed. And it's very... Now, there are a few of these old films that might feature a potato or two, like this cartoon made by the Navy about dysentery, where a soldier is peeling potatoes. And you may not even remember that in that old Steamboat Willie Mickey Mouse cartoon, sure, we all know this image, but did you know that this whole thing ends with his uncle or whatever throwing him into the kitchen and making him peel potatoes? Yeah. Or my personal favorite, this film made about juvenile delinquency called Boy with a Knife, where some rebellious kids cause chaos by stealing potato chips from a diner.
Hey, you, Mike. Where's the dough for them potato chips? Get lost, slob. I paid for them an hour ago. I saw them. You already paid for them. Stealing all the time. Stupid crap. Chasing away all my good customers.
Potatoes are there, sure, but always as a bit player. Never the lead.
You get these kids on the books, they'll have a record for life. All I want is a dime for them potato chips.
So why after all these years, when milk gets its own pieces and corn gets entire trilogies, did potatoes get left out? Too ordinary? Too humble? Was there some kind of anti-potato bias in making these old government and public domain films? Well, here's the thing. Even though potatoes never got to be the star of their own movie, they always seemed to crush it in the supporting role. Like the best friend in every rom-com, potatoes made everyone else look good. Fries elevate burgers. Hey, you need some vitamin C? Well, potatoes can do that. And mashed potatoes in every bit of American culture always complete the Thanksgiving turkey. However, if you dig a little bit deeper, you can find a time where potatoes actually got quite a bit of spotlight. That's right, even though potatoes never got their own movie, they did manage to sneak into the spotlight during World War II. All thanks to the U.S. Office of War Information. You see, back then, the Office of War Information pumped out film reels to keep the nation updated on the war effort, and reminding folks that every spud mattered.
Planting 20% more potatoes this year than last, farmers in one American state seek to beat their 1942 crop record, 42 million bushels.
Feeding soldiers? Potatoes. Supporting rationing at home? Potatoes. Growing something in your victory garden that packed the most calories per acre? Yeah, you guessed it. Potatoes. Kind of wild, right? Yeah, wheat might have been great for bread, but potatoes were the calorie kings. Per acre, they produced more energy than about anything else. In fact, potatoes can yield approximately 17 million calories per acre, while wheat typically produces around 5 to 6 million calories per acre. Pretty big difference. America's potato fields became battlefields of their own, cranking out spuds to keep soldiers and citizens alike marching forward.
In many American communities, civilian volunteers are responding to the nation's call for help in planting and harvesting vitally important food crops. The state of Maine enlists girls home from college to assist farmers in planting potatoes.
And you have to keep in mind, these reels were released to keep the public notified about what was going on with Mussolini, what was going on with Hitler, how Japan is continuing to spread influence throughout the South Pacific. Oh, and by the way, we just planted a whole new field of potatoes.
American farmers are working overtime to produce the food to win the war.
And after the war was won, potatoes had a role in rebuilding.
Among the crew are members of the fighting French Navy, who will in addition be taking home with them a cargo of 3,000 tons of seed potatoes in time for this year's planting. After 5 years of exile, it is a prospect they find encouraging. This shipment goes to the French people under the plan of the Allied Mutual Aid. It is being followed by many others.
Entire ships full of potatoes, showing that after the war, these things played an even greater role, becoming a cornerstone of recovery in war-torn nations. This humble crop provided a dependable, nutrient-rich source of sustenance, and it turned out this quiet supporting role was exactly what the world needed. Reliable, efficient, and delicious. All right, let's get to some science.
So I do research on DNA and genes and genomes, and I started working on potatoes in the early days of the genome revolution, and just brought a lot of resources, understanding the genome, genes, and the blueprint for potato. And then, it's a small group of people that actually work on potato, and it's just always been a really interesting crop to work with.
Meet Robin Buell, a plant geneticist who knows more about potatoes than most of us know about our own families. If you've ever wondered what makes a potato tick or grow, she's the one with the answers. When I found out about your work, and I couldn't think of anyone better to talk to you've studied this thing from an incredibly unique perspective.
Yeah. No, it just turns out I ended up working on it for quite some time, right? And not that many people work on potatoes, considering how much everybody loves French fries and potato chips, and it's a big food crop. Very few people actually work on potato.
Yeah, so let's start there then. So why are potatoes such an important crop worldwide?
Okay, so there's all kinds of facts about potato that you don't really even know. So it's actually a very nutritious food. It's surprising how nutritious. You can get half your vitamin C from it. I think a lot of your potassium that you would need. It also, if you think about square acreages of how much potato is produced in 1 acre, I think it produces the second most protein per acre, second only to soybean. So everybody goes, oh, soybean, okay, first you get the oil, and you get all that meal for like chicken feed and cow feed. But potatoes actually produce a lot of protein, and most people just don't even appreciate that. So it's actually a healthy food. We just fry it or put butter on it and sour cream, right? But so first of all, it's a very productive per acre, and it's actually a very nutritious food. And then, of course, in the Western world, we just fry it and chip it and, put all kinds of fat on it, and it's just tasty.
That's right. Potatoes actually pack a pretty surprising amount of nutritional punch. And it's not just modern science that's recognized their value. Another of potatoes' supporting roles was in this charming USDA film about getting enough vitamin C in school lunches from decades past.
Now, our major concern today is vitamin C in the diets of boys and girls. Discovering the importance of vitamin C and ways to include this in the diet.
And you guessed it. Even though this USDA film wasn't about potatoes, they swooped in their supporting role as a good source of vitamin C.
1/2 cup of squash gives you only about half the amount of vitamin C needed in the school lunch daily. But let's look at the baked potato. You can see that one medium-sized baked potato will give you 24 milligrams, or enough to be counted as one of the good sources of vitamin C, or fast sources of vitamin C.
Potatoes save the day once again.
Already said that tomatoes...
And we'll go ahead and skip over the whole section of this video where they talk about guinea pigs.
We decided to let them see what would happen in a guinea pig when vitamin C was left out. As you see here, this is a bad-looking specimen, and you can probably hear him squealing.
Okay, let's take a little detour. Anyone know who this is? Didn't think so. So let's change that. Meet Junius G. Groves, the Potato King, a man whose incredible story has been largely overlooked in our state. Junius Groves was born into slavery in Kentucky in 1859. Think about that. Born into bondage with no opportunities handed to him. And after the Civil War, freedom came, but it didn't come with a roadmap. Groves had to build a life from nothing. In the 1870s, he became part of the Exodusters, a movement of African Americans who migrated westward, leaving behind the systemic racism and violence of the post-Reconstruction South. These former slaves and their descendants sought freedom, land, and opportunity. And Kansas was a beacon of hope. With its promise of open farmland and the potential for independence, Groves joined thousands who uprooted their lives, determined to start over. Now, when Groves arrived in Kansas, he started small. Really small. In 1879, he purchased half an acre near Edwardsville. That's barely enough land to do much of anything. But Groves wasn't just any farmer. He poured himself into the work like no other, experimenting with innovative techniques and pushing the limits of what his land could produce. And by 1902, Groves had transformed himself into the world's top potato producer. That's right, not Kansas, not the United States, the world. His farm grew to over 500 acres and his cultivation methods set records. He was producing more potatoes per acre than anyone else, turning his small beginnings into a farming empire. Ready for something crazy? His work was so influential that when the Union Pacific Railroad was planning their tracks through Kansas, they actually made them to pass by his farm, making it easier to ship his potatoes nationwide. And when a railroad adjusts its plans for you, you're not just farming, you're shaping commerce. Now, Groves didn't just build a business, he built a community. He invested his wealth into real estate, bought property, and opened a grocery store that served the black community during segregation. He also supported education efforts and established churches, creating opportunities for others to thrive. But even with his monumental success, Groves couldn't escape the racism of the time. newspaper articles about him often carried a patronizing or outright offensive tone, reflecting the prejudices of an era that couldn't reconcile his achievements with his race. Think about that. Even as a world record-breaking farmer and community leader, he was reduced to something smaller by the media. Praised not for his brilliance or work ethic, but for staying quiet in the eyes of a racist society. Groves' life was a stark reminder that success didn't shield Black Americans from systematic discrimination, but it also didn't stop him from forging ahead and lifting others along with him. So, why isn't Junius Groves better known? Is it because he was part of the Exoduster movement? A chapter of American history that we often gloss over? Is it because we've chosen to mythologize figures like Paul Bunyan or Johnny Appleseed instead of celebrating the real people who shaped the nation? Whatever the reason, it's a glaring omission. Groves built an empire from dirt, potatoes, and sheer willpower, and was proof that even the most humble beginnings could lead to extraordinary achievements. And if we're ever gonna honor any Kansan with a holiday, I'd like to nominate this guy. So next time you see a potato at the grocery store or a Union Pacific train running through our state, I hope you think of Junius, because he's someone that deserves a lot of credit for both. Alright, let's get back to some more science. Going into the future, a future with more severe droughts, more water scarcity, soil health, water usage. It seems like potatoes are going to play a pretty big role in feeding the world. How do you kind of see your work fitting into that?
Yeah, so that's a really, really good question. And, when I give talks, especially to very young people, I gave a talk to these 8th grade girls. And I asked them, who's the most famous botanist in the world? And of course, there was complete silence, crickets for 30 seconds. And finally somebody said, Matt Damon, right? From The Martian, right? Because he was growing potatoes on Mars. But a lot of the Andes is very much, especially the very high elevations of the Andes, is very much like what they think the Mars climate is like, right? UV radiation, very dry. The soil could be quite similar, right? It has low nutrients, right? And so potato is actually one of these very highly adapted plants. It can grow almost anywhere. And you already said, wow, it's grown in the Andes, it's grown in southern England. These things can grow and are pretty adaptable. What's really important to know is that to get the right kind of yields, you have to heavily manage it. And that it likes a lot of water. It likes a lot of nitrogen to get the kind of yields that, like a U.S. farmer would want. And pest control, right? That's really important. And late blight, which you've read about, right? The Irish potato famine, it's still a significant problem. And there's still pesticides being sprayed to control that.
Using a bug spray in your home? That's fine. But make sure you remove pets and their food and water first. If you don't... Use pesticides safely. Okay?
You can make these, we will call them, you can make almost any crop more resilient. We will call it, that's what we'll term it so that, they require less water, they require less nitrogen. And so those are things that people are actively working on. And also soil health, right? You've got all these things have to be sort of looked at there. And the biggest challenge is each one of those is actually really complicated. And, we don't quite know how all of that works. And so to put all those into a single cultivar that does everything is definitely going to be challenging. But, that's where a lot of research is focused on, is this ability to adapt crops to not just changes in weather, right? But also so that you can grow them with less fertilizer, less water, right? So that it's more sustainable.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing to think about. Number one, we need to make you more famous than Matt Damon, so that doesn't happen again. You'll be on TV now, so we'll start chipping away at Matt Damon. And I guess second, yeah, I've heard a lot of rumblings recently about how when we look at future space travel and colonies on the moon, Mars, what have you, it looks like it's going to be potatoes are going to be the staple crop. I mean, what are your feelings on that? I mean, how has that kind of affected your work going like, well, geez, this we're looking so far into the future and it's off of this thing.
Yeah. Well, if you think about it, like if you were growing potatoes in your house, you could take potatoes from the refrigerator, get them to sprout. You could plant them in your garden. They would just grow, and then you would harvest them and you could put them in your basement or your garage and you could eat off of that for a long period of time. That required zero technology, right? Versus say a corn where you would have to plant it, grow it, then you would have to dry it, right? And then you'd have to store it. I mean, you could still do it, right? But I think the technology investment and the storage issues are like so much easier, right? With potato, right? So I think the fact that it has this adaptability where you already know you can take the same cultivar and you can grow it and you can still get potatoes. Maybe you'll get more yield in, a top US production field than you would say, in a marginal land with not as much water, but you would still get something, right? And I think and you would get more of a balanced food product than say you might get with corn, where you get a lot of calories, but you may not get all your amino acids and you may not get any other micronutrients, right? So I think that's what you'd want to be thinking about if you're not going to be able to make all these food shipments to Mars and Moon. You got to be thinking of what am I going to grow that I can get enough yield out of, but also what kind of nutrition are you going to get out of those, right? And so I think you're going to have more than one crop, but anything that can serve multiple purposes, calorie, protein, vitamins and micronutrients, that's definitely a winner, right?
An important vegetable to the average family is the white potato. They should be kept in the cool basement storeroom with the root crops, but must be kept dark to prevent greening. If outdoor storage is to be used, either a barrel or box or the pit or mound will do.
So you're in western Kansas, so they're growing wheat and sorghum, right? Maybe a little bit of maize. So they're all reproducing sexually, right? You have the female part of the flower, you have the pollen, which is the male part. They're fertilizing, you're making a seed, and you're harvesting the seed, okay? So that's really pretty straightforward. And you understand that like in that field of either corn or soy or wheat, every single individual there came from a seed and is genetically identical, right? So, but in potato, they're reproduced. So right now, if you took like a russet Burbank, right, which you're familiar with, that would be like what you would get at a steakhouse, right? That is very heterozygous. It's a tetraploid, so it has double the chromosome number of, say, maize or soybean. And every one of those chromosomes is different. So even if you could get it to produce seed, every seed would produce a genetically different individual. That's why potatoes, we reproduce them even in a farm situation from tubers. So you get seed pieces. Seed, people call potato seed. It's not like a seed, like a kernel. It's actually a cut up tuber or a mini tuber, and that's what's planted, because that way the genetics now will be completely identical, because we never let it have meiosis and recombine and make new genetically different individuals. So that alone makes it difficult. So that means if you're going to work on potatoes, you have to maintain what we call clonally in tissue culture. So that means you grow the plant in a little test tube, and every 3 to 4 weeks you put it in a new test tube, and you keep that growing continually so that its genetics stays exactly the same.
That's funny. I can't find any potato seeds.
You don't grow potatoes from seeds.
Well, then how do you grow them?
You cut up potatoes with an eye or two in each piece, and that's what you plant.
But if you have to have potatoes to grow potatoes, well, how'd they ever get started in the first place?
Jimmy.
You're going too far back, Jimmy. This is a victory garden, not a garden of Eden, you know.
The farmer is going to grow whatever variety the processing company tells them. And also in potato, we're growing really old, unimproved varieties. Whereas corn, they're the more recent ones. They're highly improved. So russet Burbank, which you know the name, right? You knew the name. That variety is really over 150 years old.
Wow. That's
crazy. I'll send you this story because it's a fascinating story, and it tells you all the issues with potato breeding, but also how there's some social and economic issues that dictate production, right?
And so we're just eating clones of this old man potato?
Hasn't had sex in like 150 years. Yeah.
Wow. Crazy.
If potatoes are stored where it is warm, they will sprout and shrivel.
So it's a fascinating story, and I think anybody who watches your broadcast who's a master gardener would like it. So that variety was developed in 1870 by Luther Burbank. He's the father of horticulture. He developed hundreds of varieties, like the Shasta daisy, many other things he bred. He was very, very famous. And so he made this variety, and it was long, smooth-skinned, sort of like a Yukon Gold skin, smooth. And he sold that variety because he wanted to move. He lived in Massachusetts, and he wanted to move to Santa Rosa, California. So he wanted money. So he sold it for $150. Okay. And then it was grown for like 30 years around the U.S., and it was known as the Burbank seedling potato. And everybody loved it because it was high yielding. It stored well. Okay. Of course it had to. There was no refrigeration. And it had really good yield. And then it's not really clear, like around 1910, some 1915, somewhere around there, people found this like netted version, rough version of Burbank, and that is known as the russet Burbank. So that's actually a mutation. It's called a sport. So these things happen every now and then. You get this mutation. So there was this mutation to cause this russeting, and that's russet Burbank. So you've been eating a clone that actually has a mutation in it.
Yep, we've been eating clones with mutations of a thing that originally came from the Andes. And as we face global challenges like climate change and food security, the potato might just save the world. I mean, we are taking it to space after all.
All right, easy, Jerry, relax. If we carve each other up, pretty soon there won't be any more Regals left.
Production of Real Ag is made possible in part by an underwriting grant from
Kansas Farmers Union, working to protect and enhance the economic interests and quality of life for family farmers, ranchers, and our rural communities. Learn more about our mission of education, cooperation, and legislative advocacy at kansasfarmersunion.org.